Welcome to the Decentralized podcast, where we break down the world of Web3, digital assets, and DAOs with me, your host, Petri Basson. In this episode of the Decentralized podcast, we have a conversation with Nick Naraghi, also known as NintyNick. And Nick is the co-founder of Hats Protocol. He has a very interesting background in startups, the DAO space, and we cover a lot in this episode, going from personal development to startups, and also getting to the really technical detail of DAOs and how you can implement the Hats Protocol and all the different things you can do with it. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Nick, thank you very much for joining us. Really looking forward to you. You work with Hats Protocol. Other people probably know you as NintyNick. We're going to get into Hats Protocol, what you guys do, all the detail. But I was thinking it might be interesting to kick this one off with doing masterminds. I know you mentioned previously that you've done a mastermind. It's helped you a lot. What have you done with masterminds? How have they helped you in your career? You've done a few startups as well.
Totally. So there's me and two other great entrepreneurs who I've been working with in a mastermind format for the last now 8 years. And we met when I was an undergrad, and we had this idea. One of the guys, Chris, said, hey, Benjamin Franklin did this thing. And if you read Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill did this thing. I really want to try it. And we were like, okay, let's give it a shot. What might that look like? And it's evolved into this really amazing process of setting goals on a quarterly basis, defining them with OKRs, personal OKRs. And then tracking on a weekly basis, what are the most important tasks, where are our habits at, our health, how resourced are we? And really these guys have seen, week by week, every part of my journey. Charlie and Chris are in my corner fully. And just to be in that process of developing and growing with them has been foundational. And then, that quarterly cadence has I brought that into all the projects that I've worked on. So creates that sort of stability and goal setting, planning, thinking about how to set smart goals. So it's been invaluable to my work.
That's really interesting. I mean, that accountability alone is really valuable, because I think a lot of people set goals, going to do this, but you've got two other people keeping you accountable. You're keeping them accountable as well. And it's cool bringing all of that into the companies as well. As a founder, as someone running companies, how much have you focused on self-development? You mentioned Napoleon Hill. Is there any other books that you've read, anything else that sort of had a big impact?
Yeah, I'm a big self-development nerd. Yeah. You can wonder about why, but I found it to be very fulfilling to just go deep into my own process and learn about how I can be better in various ways. And some of that's better at performance, better at certain skills, better at my craft. And some of it's healing, things that have been challenges for me, things from childhood, things from school that were challenging experiences that cultivated who I am as a person. I'm really working through that and integrating into the best leader that I can be, and also, being of service to my community and the projects I'm working on in the world in the best way that I can be too.
Awesome. I think that what you mentioned there is sort of making yourself the best version, because I see a lot of founders and they're working on the company a lot of the time, but they're not looking after themselves. And you can't really lead if you're leading from behind almost. You're always trying to catch up. You mentioned health. We talked a little bit about sleep. What are you sort of tracking? What are you doing diet, sleep-wise, exercise-wise, just to help with that performance?
Yeah, the stuff that I track, I have 4 pillars: sleep, meditation, reflection, and exercise. And for me, that's mostly lifting or dance, ecstatic dance. I try to, my best performance, I'm on 5 a week on each of those things. I don't like a super strict routine. It's just not my style. But if I could just track in the mastermind sheet that I have 5 of those each week, then I'm usually in pretty good shape.
Okay.
7.5 hours of sleep. Obviously, didn't get that last night.
The events were busy, so
totally. Meditation is a cornerstone of my whole practice. Really, at least 10 minutes, but I've more been doing 30 or 45 lately, which has been really nice.
Awesome. What kind of meditation do you do?
I do a few different kinds, depending on where I'm at and how long it's been and how much I have going on. The first step is usually just feeling into my body and seeing what's there and what's not yet resolved, and kind of just like letting that resolve. Then I do some stuff around just like centering and grounding myself, and just taking in energy after that if I can.
Awesome. No, I do something similar. Journal in the morning, do that meditation. And I found my days just go better when I do that. If you're not doing it, you're a little bit rushed, everything and all that. It just centers you a little bit, makes the day a little bit better. And I think you're probably a better leader because you're, not reacting. You've almost got that little bit of a gap. I think that's one of the meditations I listen to. Is they said it's about the space between the breath. It's sort of that in between and having that awareness. So that's really useful and very cool. Now, you've done a few different startups, worked at a few different startups. We work in an industry with lots of different startups. What are some of the mistakes you see some of the startups in this industry making, and what do you think they really need to focus on? The fact that you have the goals and everything is very structured. So what are you seeing out there, and what do you think people need to work on?
Totally. I think we have a tremendous amount of technology-minded folks, brilliant technological minds. And one trap that I see, inventors and other technologists fall into, myself included, is just building things because they're cool and exciting.
Yep.
And there is a certain emergent property to doing it that way. But build it and they will come. I came up in a very like Silicon Valley and even Boston entrepreneurship mindset, which is Silicon Valley is like, we got to find product market fit. We have to, make sure we're building something that people want. Boston is even more aggressive. It's like, we need to get revenue. Like, we need to be like super pragmatic about it, P&L. So, I try to learn from and integrate pieces of that. So just to answer the question, I would say really just rigorous analysis of what users, what customers want, being in a tight, feedback loop with the people who you are serving by building something for them, and then rigorously cutting everything that's not oriented toward finding product market fit, or however you want to frame that. I think there's also like a significant skill in not only user interviewing but also selling. That's important and probably not undervalued but under resourced in our industry, just because it's so technology heavy, and everyone, even if people don't identify as like techno, some people say I'm non-technical. So, well, I don't know. You just like jumped from Etherscan to a DAO platform. Now you're, like reading transactions and posting stuff. It's pretty technical. Yeah. And at least as a baseline, it's really required to do anything in this industry. So,
I think I see that a lot as well. It's fun getting into the tech and all the cool stuff, getting deep into it, but you have to make it accessible to everyone else. If we really want mass adoption, lots of people to use it, to really understand it. And sales has a bad connotation. You don't want to be a salesman, etc. But if you want to run a company, you want to make a living, you have to do sales. And I see that quite a lot. I've seen that in my own companies, etc. If you're not that good at sales, it isn't build it and they will come. It's just not how the world works, unfortunately. You run sort of remote teams. Most of the teams that we work with, etc., they're also remote. What would be some of your tips for running a remote team? Sort of, how do you guys connect? How do you, allocate tasks, make sure everyone knows what's going on in the company?
Yeah, I'll just start off by, giving a caveat here, which is that this project, I think it's nice to frame it as a project, and even more so than a company, because it just enters the language territory of the way that we're organizing it a little bit of a different way. But that context relevant to the question is, we're really a group of sovereign individuals who are coming together to try to create something. And Hats obviously is about, architecting the right organizational structure to help get things done. So we take those kind of decisions really seriously. Like, how are we going to create the right structure? Who are we going to put into leadership roles? Help hold them accountable. But I think we've maintained like a very flat structure in our organization, and we want to be a DAO. So we're practicing being a DAO in the proto DAO. Like, we're running a cool experiment, which I'd love to talk about in a bit. And that's going really well. But we're also preparing in the labs company to move into that DAO structure. So in previous startups where I would say, okay, I'm the CEO, here's what we need to get done. Here's the goals. Let's go. It's not like that the way we're working right now. And I think there's a little bit more complexity to work in a, sovereign sense making type of organization. It changes the way to answer the question, which is like, how do you help people understand what tasks they need to do? How do you help align people with the overarching goals? It's just lots of conversations and, asking people to really own that sense of, they're part of the puzzle and they're the pieces that they're connected to. I'm extremely excited to say that everyone on our team is world class and a great leader in their own domain and really good at working together. So I don't do too much like saying, okay, this is the specific things we need to do. A lot of my piece of the puzzle is bringing insights from our users. We call our users wearers, and making sure that that's part of the product process and incorporated into the full stack. And I kind of synthesize and hold the whole of the project across all the different pieces.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's a cool segue because you were also involved with Eden Gov. You were DAO member, sort of founder over there, and that helps Web3 projects to become decentralized. So I know you guys created your 3 main roles, sort of what to focus on. Have you guys learned sort of what's that framework for that you created?
Yeah, it's amazing. Really, really, I think about Eden Gov a lot. Because we kind of had this hypothesis about progressive decentralization being one of the most important things to figure out. And it kind of been watching the DAO space for many years. 2021 felt like this kind of critical moment. I had just shut down my last startup and was like looking around for what I was going to do next. And I actually went to DAO Rush Week, which Niran from Panvala hosted. And, it's basically like 1 hour calls with all the different DAOs over the course of a week. And I was like, oh, okay, what's going on? And, I went to the Raid Guild call and, just was so, excited and floored. And I was like, all right, I'm going to get involved here. And that was kind of one track. And then I called up, a friend of mine who lived in San Francisco. We'd, become friends through a community there called One Salon. I was like, I think I want to try to do this DAO thing. And he said, oh, we need a DAO. Like, I don't know that it's easy to pull off or that anyone could really do it, but yeah, well, give it a shot. And that was like our first customer for Eden Gov. It was like going through that process of kind of on the fly, making progressive decentralization makes sense in theory. Obviously, people want to be decentralized for myriad reasons. But what does it actually take to do it? And I sat down with Marcus Phillips, who's a great mentor to me and friend. And, we were co-founding Eden Gov together, and we kind of created this hypothesis of mapping out the governance surface, which is a term we got from MetaGov, Josh Tan and Nathan Schneider. And then we basically jumped to like, okay, well, what would it look like if we kind of created a roadmap of all the different authorities that were in that governance surface, and then start to kind of like figure out how we were going to have the hard conversations about those over time. And that's now kind of been folded into our process with the hats. When we sit down with a DAO, what we're doing right up front is like mapping the governance surface. And now we have this beautiful protocol for thinking about all the stakeholders, all the roles, a really nuanced way to break down not just authority, but responsibility and also accountability. So it goes to this like that kind of seedling of the concept space of progressive decentralization now has like a lot more prior art and a lot of supporting technology with Hats Protocol to actually make it happen. So I'm excited to see the way that's kind of evolved over time.
I mean, I have to say it's really interesting because with DAOs, you have this great concept of you've got a bunch of people on the internet that are going to make decisions, work together on things, but it has to get practical. You have to give people responsibility, authority to be able to do things, because in the end, the community votes on something, but someone needs to actually go do the work. someone needs to be able to do everything, make sure things are happening, but have accountability as well. So, I mean, that's a good segue into getting into hats. I mean, we've got a mixed audience. Some people are technical, some people are not that technical. If you had to explain hats to let's say, an 8-year-old, how would you explain hats to someone that they weren't DAO native, if I can put it that way?
Yeah. We've been playing with a new way to say it, which is that a hat is tokenized power. So if you're an organization, you want to give power to specific individuals so that they can act on behalf of the organization and actually get things done. You get that operational efficiency component. But what are the preconditions by which you would give someone power? Well, you trust them. It's clearly scoped power. Making it explicit helps. And then you can hold them accountable in some meaningful way. So hats kind of has all those pieces baked into it. The other way that we said it that is kind of it's fun meme is it's like a job in a box. So when we say hats, like wearing many hats, people are like, oh yeah, I'm a founder, I wear many hats, so people kind of immediately get it from there.
Okay. It's a cool way because it's part of the conversation almost. It's natural language. It's already included.
Yeah.
So people automatically get, I'm wearing multiple hats, today I'm this, today I'm that. So, I mean, I have to say that's a really clever one in terms of doing that. I mean, you've interacted with a lot of DAOs. You've seen a lot of things go wrong as well. What do you think is some of the issues that hats will be able to fix in the DAO industry?
Yeah, so there's kind of this natural progression of a project, right? Whether you're starting as an entrepreneur starting a company, DAO summoner, going through this process of creating something that's totally a Web3 native on-chain organization. It follows a similar pattern, which is there's an amazing idea. People are excited. There's excitement around that idea, and there's people who start to want to get involved, right? And then there's some sort of capital formation moment, right? So you see fundraisers, you see token launches, friends and family rounds, however you want to frame that. And in Web3, we have basically like the entity formation, which is the DAO, right? You can obviously mirror that with like making a Delaware C Corp or something. But then the following question is, okay, we've got this idea, we've got this excitement, we're interfacing correctly with our agreements in terms of the way that we're relating, providing some trust or safety in the organization itself. And now we need to get things done. So how do we get things done? And org charts or power structures or titles in the traditional world, no one second guesses that or questions it. It's just like very standard. And oftentimes it's a figment of the CEO's imagination, just like kind of making up, and it lives there. And it's often very different from what the reality is. And DAOs kind of kept hitting the same point in the curve, like lots of DAOs, amazing idea, lots of excitement, people ape in, you do a token launch, whatever it is. And then you get to this point where like, okay, we have our token, we have our governor, or we have our Moloch DAO, we have some contract in place that's actually going to, now we try to get things done. Okay, we're just in Discord, we're vibing, like, so who feels that kind of internal impetus to try to do something on behalf of the DAO and like do the sense making on what's the right thing to do, feel kind of connected to their own skill set and like to ship something on their own basis. Like it's very, very, it's very entrepreneurial. It requires a certain mindset, skill set to kind of like self-manage and also understand what the org needs. And you have a bunch of things that are not 100% there, like a bunch of things the org doesn't need. And then should we pay for that? Should we not pay for that? We didn't pay for it up front, whatever. It gets very weird. So I think that natural progression in the life cycle of on-chain organizations is that people will pick up hats and they'll say, okay, well, these are the goals. This is the structure that will actually support those goals. We're going to delegate this to, working groups, small teams, individual leaders. We can tell kind of the full breadth of the complexity of the organization, all the different parts and how they fit together and be able to kind of weave them. So I would just say like the thing that I'm most excited for hats to solve is increasing the operational efficiency of organizations and also again, that idea of being able to really empower people with more authority and access and permissions, without fear that that will ruin the DAO because we have no way of clawing it back or holding them accountable.
Yeah, I think that accountability is what's really interesting. I mean, that's what I'd like to get into, because you've got the community is making decisions, they're allocating to certain individuals, but you see that quite often where there is no recourse, they sort of, can't take control away, etc. So I think communities are concerned about that. You mentioned org charts, you guys have sort of your hats trees. So how is a hats tree similar to an org chart, and what logic can you build into it? Because that's where this gets really interesting, is you can now build authority that traditionally was an org chart and an internal policy. You can build that into a smart contract and actually implement and enforce that practically. So if you can sort of just tell us how that works.
Totally. So I'll just say, like, we have the whole stack of Hats protocol. So we have the protocol itself at the smart contract layer. We have modules that help with that programmability. I'll get to in a second. We have an SDK that supports, any open source developer, someone building a front end for Hats, or integrating Hats directly into their existing app, workspace, or communication channels. That whole stack is open source. And then in addition to that, we've built an app because that's Spencer Graham, one of our co-founders, has this thesis early on called basically like anchor apps. And you would need, the idea is that for any protocol to get meaningful usage, like Uniswap, for example, you have to have the team that's building protocol probably has to be the one, or someone has to be the one to build the first application on the platform that drives usage. So we shipped that, and then we shipped an opinionated interface, which has a tree structure in it. You see people like Sobol who went with circles and different ways to kind of express organizational forms. So I would say, I caveat all that because I think it's easy to look at and say, oh, it's an org chart, on-chain org chart, right? And then you miss a lot by doing that. But it also helps people kind of get the first concept into their mind. The reason I'm particularly sensitive to that is just because people are like, oh, that's not a DAO, right? That's not what we want, right? So what the whole point of Hats is really to kind of categorize the key decisions that need to be made in an organization, and basically segment those into different hats, and be able to apply different security models and decision-making models to each of those decisions. So you have this idea of a one of one versus a one of n versus an m of n in various forms, right? You could have 3 of 5 multi-sig. You could have 50%, majority 51% vote on a 20% quorum snapshot vote that executes on chain using OSNAP. You could have any governor DAO contract wear a hat, right? And these just all represent different decision-making models behind the decision that's allocated or kind of like delegated to a particular hat. And that's how it's very different from an org chart, is that you might have, a lot of times we encourage people to put what we call the top hat, or like the super admin of an entire tree, in the DAO contract. So you have like all the token holders voting on any kind of like the backstop to any decision, and usually running an election process for, like in Super Rare's case, the Rare DAO. You have this like 7-person council that's elected by the like token holder vote, and just making sure that that's kind of like a core help, that the accountability or the admin relationship is fundamental to the organization, is a pattern that we see a lot. I know I said a lot there, so
no. I mean, you covered a lot, and I think that's where it's a very important distinction, because I think there's sort of almost resistance against being like traditional corporations that are very hierarchical. But there is value in, for example, giving the community, as you said, if they're that admin hat, giving the community that control, so the community is actually able to do those kinds of things. But then they're also able to keep people accountable. So if one of those council members, they're not doing their job, they've done something they shouldn't have done, they can actually remove that hat and take authority away. Because, I mean, we'll get into what you can do with hats in a little bit, but hats are really powerful as well.
Right.
You can give people a lot of responsibility and things that they can do with that hat. So I think that accountability is really interesting.
Just on the point of hierarchy, because I think that's like people kind of polarize around that. I would say hierarchy is not fundamentally bad. What happens is capture of power, right? So Spencer also wrote this piece, kind of foundational piece in DAO space called anti-capture. And the whole frame is like, okay, how do we create meaningful structures that prevent the capture of power and resources at various scales? And DAOs are one way to do that. And, Hats empowered DAOs help kind of do that at a broader scale while getting the benefits of more operational efficiency, but maintaining capture resistance. Like when we talk to people, they don't really like necessarily key in on this as like the main pain that they're feeling, because we work a lot with governance facilitators, people who are kind of like running the process of governance, and they're not saying, "Well, I need to make sure this is capture resistant," but it's kind of one of those things that people start to use hats, or they're in DAOs for a while and say, "Oh yeah, actually it's really important." But it's not the kind of exciting thing at the front of the puzzle.
No, the capture resistance is definitely a concern, but I think the other thing that's interesting here is you can, based on certain metrics, give people hats because of their contribution and everything. So recognition as well for true contribution. Because we've all seen this in DAOs. Sometimes it's popularity contest,
right?
Where it should be a contribution contest in terms of what have you done, etc.
Nice.
You guys can measure that, actually allocate things out. If we sort of start getting into what hats can do, hat signer gates.
Yeah.
What are those? How do they work? So people start getting some ideas.
Yeah, Hat Signer Gate is a Zodiac module built for Gnosis safes, which are obviously very popular. We see them in almost every single Hats tree. And Hat Signer Gate allows you to token gate signing authority on a Gnosis safe using Hat. So you would create a Hats tree. You get, just to, I guess, give a little context, Hats are ERC 1155s that are kind of have parent-child admin relationships with one another. You can have the whole kind of grandparent and great-grandparent are super admins of the child, grandchildren. And Signergate, once you create each hat, you get a token ID. And those token IDs can be plugged into various token gates, on-chain token gates, off-chain token gates, put directly into smart contracts for kind of like role-based access control, or using something like Guild or Collabland, or like the roles built directly into Charmburst to give the person who has this hat in their wallet access to various platforms. So Signergate is really a token gate for Gnosis safes. And what it unlocks is instead of having kind of this, you have the DAO, and then you form a bunch of multi-sigs, you put people that you trust on those multi-sigs, and then you send funds to those multi-sigs, and then you hope that they use it correctly. There's so many of our early wearers were like, the fact that there's zero accountability and that we can't claw back the funds. It's just part of our operating model. Like we just count those funds as spent as soon as we send it out. And that, for people in our industry who are at the frontier and kind of like the risk tolerance is very high, maybe that's okay, but we'll never get to mass adoption with that type of model. So being able to like change out the signers on the multi-sig using a DAO vote, or using things like you mentioned, like programmatic criteria for having a hat, and then being able to claim signing authority based on having that hat. That's really powerful. And one thing about just the technical aspect of how we wrote Signergate is there's no lag time between a hat being revoked and the person losing signing authority. So if there's some sort of on-chain criteria, like you have to have a certain number of the DAO's tokens in order to have this hat, and then you sell the tokens, and you were a signer on the multisig based on having that hat. As soon as you sell the tokens, you no longer have the hat, and as soon as you no longer have the hat, you're no longer a signer. That there's no like lame duck period in between.
I think that's a cool thing as well, because you're not dependent on someone else changing, fixing everything. The other thing for me that's really interesting is you can create a hat, give that hat authority to sign on 2 different wallets. They might have access to certain accounts, etc. But people in organizations and DAOs change. Now, we've all worked with the tech, changing multiple Gnosises, giving everyone access, etc. That's a process.
Right.
But over here, what you can do is you can just change that hat.
Right.
remove it from that one person, allocate it to the new address that should control it. So organizational change becomes much easier as well in terms of just moving authority and making it much easier if someone moves on, does something else.
100%. Yeah. When, for our governance facilitators who are, orchestrating a lot of this onboarding and offboarding, this is saving them a ton of time and stress. For like our community chat, no one has to like onboard someone and like get them to make sure that they understand the agreements. We have an eligibility module in Hats that checks for someone's on-chain signature of having read and signed a code of conduct.
Okay.
So once they do that, they're then eligible for that. They can claim it, and then they can join our Telegram group. That's saves maybe 15, 30 minutes times like how many people are actually joining the chat. And then you have that kind of alignment. If you're changing over, and the benefit obviously scales depending on how much authority is associated with the hat. So if you have like the full suite, right, you have a snapshot strategy attached to that hat ownership, you have multi-sig signing authority, maybe you have a token bound account associated with it for, a specific budget or a compensation stream. And you have access to workspaces and access to communication channels, all associated with the hat. Once you can make those initial connections to the token ID, then it's just a matter of give the person the token ID, take it away. Especially if you're doing that across 7 council members or 50 stewards or 250 community members, you just imagine how quickly that time savings adds up, and you just have so much like clarity and legibility of who is actually part of this group.
Yeah, no, and I think you've sort of alluded to it now, because I think a lot of people, the nicest thing everyone gets, that's on-chain, everyone understands it. But the thing that's interesting here is the off-chain connections as well. So you've you can make Discord roles, Google Workspace, Telegram. What are some of the interesting use cases you've seen in terms of connecting the off-chain as well? Because, the 1155, everything is very much on-chain, but you can connect that to the stuff you use every single day. So what are some of the interesting connections, stuff that you've seen?
Yeah. So, we've always taken the approach that, token gating requires a token and a gate. So we're, and just even a layer up from there is that, we're creating kind of like this interoperable shelling point for the infrastructure of roles and power delegation in DAOs. So we're very happy to have lots of composable building blocks that easily connect with Hats and took like the fully modular approach, which we think, wins in Web3. So when we work with someone like Guild or Collabland to do those types of integrations, permissionlessly, right? Their stuff is open source, our stuff is open source. We bridge the gap, and sometimes like someone who's building out a Hats tree like picks up all these pieces and shows us in the community chat. We're like, wow, that's amazing, that's so cool. But it also means that like what we are limited to the things that are token gateable by these existing platforms. Like Hats and the team behind Hats is not building token gating solution from like having the hat to being able to gate Google Docs, for example. We rely on Guild for that. And there's some like Lit protocol just launched. We're really excited about like the new types of kind of generalizable token gating that will be available based on that. But the industry is still evolving in terms of like what you can token gate and the level of even like centralized admin control of the token gate itself. So I think, the next like 2 to 5 years, what we'll start to see is like, a lot of the Web3 versions of the Web2 tooling that we all use become like more powerful and reach feature parity, and then just like scale up much faster because both composability and because of the kind of fundamental like honoring of the Ethereum account as the basis for login, as opposed to email or phone number or other tools.
No, and I think it's a much more transparent way to do it as well, because you can see on chain, you can identify who has which hats, etc., versus someone's email somewhere and admin controlling everything.
Totally.
So it is sort of the evolution of how we work and how you see everything. Another thing that for me that's really interesting is, I work with foundations a lot, and I think a lot of communities are concerned with the foundation. What's the foundation? What are they doing, etc. And the foundations have some responsibilities. You have to do KYC checks, you have to sign agreements with people, those kinds of things. But what you can do here is, for example, in the council election, the community elects the council, the 7 council members are identified, they claim their hats, but we could potentially put in sort of a hat that has the authority to approve who gets that hat based on, have we done a background check on them? I mean, we've unfortunately seen it with communities where people with broad backgrounds were sitting on treasury wallets. So you need to do those checks sometimes. But I think that's where, for me, the like traditional side and the really on-chain side get together, because you can then give that foundation the authority. They're not controlling the vote, they're not controlling the community, but they can do that check for KYC and say, okay, yes, these guys pass, and the funds can flow. And that for me is a really nice one, because you still have that on-chain governance control, but you just build in sort of almost a gate, to use terminology, before something actually, somebody gets that control of assets, of funds, all those kinds of things. So for me, that's really powerful. And that's where the traditional Web2, traditional companies, etc., really start layering on top of what you guys have built.
100%. Yeah. Unfortunately, I've seen so many DAOs start up and they have to ask this question, like, okay, what is the right regulatory strategy, right? And, if you go to an accelerator in the US and you start a company, that stuff is all playbooks. You don't have to think about that. So you get to really focus on what you're doing. But most DAO founders and summoners and people working in Web3 spend maybe 10, 20, 30% of their time in the initial phases figuring out how the heck are we going to do this.
Yeah.
And there's so many different options. We're really still in an environment that lacks regulatory clarity that I believe would support innovation. So I'd like to see that. That being said, no matter what your strategy is, Hats is kind of a very open canvas to express lots of different enforcement styles, right? So if you're moving from this 2D object from just a company or just a DAO to this 3D object of, acting in various jurisdictions, that's a very, it's a more complicated approach. And I think Hats helps with whatever strategy or approach you're taking to that, to express it and make it clear and legible to the people who are in your organization, so you can get things done.
Yeah.
And if you feel like KYC is the right approach, let's go by the book, you can make it happen. If you need to have certain actors, foundation directors involved, because that's in your bylaws, you can make that happen. If you're a bunch of anonymous open source contributors working on a permissionless protocol, we have that. And that's also, the canvas allows you to express these things. So I'll just say that Hats is, V1, totally open source, totally permissionless, non-upgradable. It's on Ethereum forever. So that we have at least that assurance to people who are already in this amazing ecosystem that it's going to be around. It's already unstoppable.
I think that's also a thing that puts communities at ease almost. Completely open source out there. Anyone can change it, see what's going on. There's no risk that you guys go and change Hats fundamentally and take control of their DAO or anything like that.
Right.
And that's the beauty of the industry we work in.
Right.
Is people can actually use it and implement those things.
Right.
So, yeah.
And what we're trying to do, what we're really excited about, is this model of creating a public utility. So this idea that we can create this core piece of infrastructure that accomplishes the task at hand. Tokenizing power, giving people roles, and also having a movement, like this kind of bizarre style as opposed to cathedral style open source movement where people are creating modules, creating front ends, integrations, shipping those, and then the whole ecosystem benefits from it. And you get this huge network effect that happens. And just being in that process with our community, being one contributor, kind of like, okay, we built the Anchor app, but we already have, there's 5 different front ends that use Hats already. And that's super exciting to us. We see things that people try to do with Hats that wasn't aligned necessarily with our initial thinking, and it blows our minds, right? It's like, wow, I'm so impressed that they took it and used it in that way, and maybe there's benefits of that opposed to how we originally thought about it.
Yeah, I think that's a cool thing, is where people take what you've built, they start doing things with that. Maybe before we get into other modules, I know you guys worked with Treasure DAO, you implemented with them. What did you guys do with them? How are they using Hats?
Yes, Treasure DAO is a very fascinating use case. And my understanding is basically that Treasure DAO became a massive delegate in the Arbitrum ecosystem. And, there's entire organizations that are focused on being great at being a professional delegate. But Treasure DAO started kind of for another reason, right? They have their whole focus. And by having this great responsibility of being the biggest or one of the biggest delegates in our DAO, now you kind of pass that on to all of the members of the Treasure DAO. Say, okay, in addition to like your main goal in Treasure DAO, you now have to pay attention to everything that's happening in ARB. And that on one hand, it's cool. Like it's it's a big responsibility. And on the other hand, it just could be very distracting. So what they did was they said, okay, we're going to basically elect a council that is the group of people who act as the delegate with all of the ARB delegation from Treasure in the actual Arbitrum DAO. But that way, not everyone in the DAO has to kind of like read up on the Arbitrum forums and figure out what's going on. We'll kind of empower this group of people as liaisons to the DAO. And I just think that model is amazing, right? I think the fundamental concept of the DAO has some key authority and resources, delegate that to a small group that acts on behalf of the DAO, can kind of move those roles over on a term by term basis and revoke if there's bad actors or people who go rogue or like go MIA, right? So that was really exciting, and we worked with Gnosis Guild. They just shipped the Zodiac Rules Mod V2, which allows you to do a lot more expressive things with specific permissions on a safe or shared smart account. So that combination of hats with the token gating plus roles mod and a safe is kind of like definitely something I expect to see in many more hats implementations.
Well, I mean, that is very cool. And I think you make an interesting point because being a delegate is a full-time job almost. And for a community to be doing that, reading all the proposals, knowing what's going on, that just doesn't make sense. And everyone doesn't have time to do that. But as a delegate, you have to still interact. You've got that responsibility. So giving someone via hats that authority, but without just, as you said, trust, we'll trust everyone and give it away. There's still accountability because there's a hat, people, will do what they do and you can remove access, do what you need to do there.
Right.
So I think it's for the entire ecosystem. That's very exciting.
Yeah.
Because DAOs interacting with DAOs in that kind of scenario is, I think, something we're going to see a lot more. Where it's not just a company, an individual contributor, etc. It's actually another DAO interacting with a DAO and working together. And this is going to enable that interaction because in the end, a human being still needs to do it. Someone gets that authority to actually post, make the decision, whatever it might be.
It might not always be human beings.
Doesn't guess.
This is a can of worms, of course, but I think there's a lot of progress on AI agents, and AI agents wearing hats is very much something we think about. My last project before hats was an AI company. We were working on creating back in 2018, working on creating AI agents that kind of had your repository of all of your knowledge and would interact with other agents to kind of get the knowledge that was relevant to your goals, and help you kind of like plan what your best strategy was to achieve your goal. And a lot of that was focused on like learning plans, like career progression, things like that. But this core concept of, well, I have an agent, you have an agent, we need to share knowledge or we need to get something done together. And that those agents in combination can do maybe 80% of the work, and they'll just ping us if we need to like step in for the other 20%. I definitely think we're going to see that in DAOs like in the next 24 months. And you already started to see some of this like on-chain agent based transactions and things starting to happen.
So I mean, that's a fascinating idea. What would you, if you had to give a practical example of an AI agent with a hat?
Yeah.
What is something you might have seen or something you think we're going to see in the next 6 months?
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of Kia Krutler. Wrote these really formative pieces for me in the DAO ecosystem about kind of like the prehistory of DAOs and how all the gaming guilds and internet culture that kind of led to this moment of DAOs and some other things. And she presented this idea of dynamic hierarchies, that you could have kind of not just one hierarchy, but many hierarchies based on many different reputation models or decision-making models, we think about like, okay, who should have the right hats at any given time? Well, this kind of takes that another step further. And it's like, what should the organizational structure look like for each part of the organization at any given time? And the dynamic version of that is that they kind of, the DAO originates a goal. There's an entire structure that's formed around that goal, and that structure kind of like grows and shrinks dynamically to accomplish that goal and when the goal is done. This helps with capture resistance. But the reason I bring it up is because I can imagine a world where these structures are forming in minutes, and you have a bunch of people who say, hey, I logged in for the day, I'm available to do tasks. You have kind of like an on-chain resume of the skills that you're good at and things that you'd love to do and your rates or whatever. And the DAO says, okay, today we're going to try to accomplish this complex task. And we have these 70 people who are available. We're going to take these 45 and kind of like accomplish this goal. And here's the structure and here's all the authorities and go. And then by the end of the day, you have this amazing artifact that's been produced. And then the structure kind of melts. I think that, the agents that are wearing kind of the two agents in that model, one is the one that's kind of proposing and putting forth the organizational structure. So like an admin, oftentimes we're calling this an autonomous admin or configurator in a Hats tree. And then the other one is like, in order to get all that work done, probably these individuals are working with or collaborating with, generative agents, whether that's GPTs or stuff like Midjourney, where you're like creating all the pieces of the deliverable and shipping it, and maybe curating it and then shipping it.
I think that's especially with the work allocation point, because you can have hats, allocate those to those available individuals, give them the authority access that they need, they can do the work. And then you don't have to worry about offboarding almost, removing access. You just remove the hat. So it's very flexible in terms of gig economy, helping people, but also the capture resistance, but the sort of flux, because you see it in DAOs. There is spikes of activity and then lulls. So you can really start managing that. So that's very interesting. I want to get into one of the next modules. So eligibility module.
Yeah.
That's an exciting and interesting one. So just high level, what is that? How does that work?
Yeah, we've kind of been jumping around it, but it's actually like one of the most important parts of hats. So what eligibility module is basically is every hat has in the struct on chain, you have eligibility, which is any Ethereum address. So the admin structure is just the parent-child relationships in the tree, and those are kind of formed based on the way that you build the tree. But there's a separate, that's the kind of like granting, creating the hats, editing them, editing the permissions associated with them, and then eligibility is the person or multi-sig or DAO or contract, the smart contract logic that can revoke the hat. So that's separated out from admin so that we can bring this programmability to it. So a lot of times we see, okay, we just set it to the DAO's address as we get started, and if the DAO wants to revoke the hat, then they can. But eventually you start to see things like, well, we want to automate this, right? We were trying to bring automation into the tree to create more operational efficiency. What on-chain criteria can we use to represent that this person should have the hat or not? And we're doing things like, having DAO shares, having a number of DAO tokens, having staked tokens of a certain type, having NFTs, and now kind of exploring, obviously, elections, right? So fully on-chain elections, using Snapshot, No Snap, using Joke Race, and then also thinking about things like, Gitcoin passport scores, right? If you want to have, and you can chain these, by the way, and or logic we've built as eligibility modules, you can deploy all this stuff from the app. So you're like, okay, we want to make sure that this person signed a community agreement, and we want to make sure that there's some Sybil resistance. So we'll use like the agreement claims that we talked about earlier with the community the community member hat. Plus, we'll also use like a Gitcoin passport score of 20 or more. And, those modules, there's about 20 eligibility modules right now that are part of our registry, and our proto DAO is kind of curating that registry. But eventually, we imagine like there might be thousands of modules, all open source. And what's really cool is we're basically like have a whole process for aggregating those in the registry, stamping them that they're kind of like approved on a minimal basis by the proto DAO. I think that curation probably evolves over time. And then we have an SDK that anyone who's building apps or building the kind of integrated apps can not only get all of Hats Protocol and our functionality, but get also all of the modules that are kind of like this open source ecosystem. And just being able to service that, and then as a governance facilitator or someone who thinks that they're not technical but is actually very technical, they can go into these apps and deploy this programmatic eligibility modules, change the tokens, change the thresholds, all using no code. And then suddenly you've set up this like very complex structure that helps you achieve your goals, make sure the right people have the right hats at the right time, has hat signer gate, all in very quickly, 30 or 45 minutes, and without having to touch either scan or even write any code.
But I think that's the exciting thing, especially if you're thinking about the non-technical, technical people. You can design things for a community where the right people have the right access and can do the right things, because it is a completely open ecosystem. Anyone can do anything. But in certain instances, I mean, we've got a lot of trolls out there. So potentially you don't want someone who's never interacted with this community, who doesn't even own the token, to be able to do some things. But you can automate all of that. So there's no human being. There's no that sort of capture that you were talking about. There's not John as the guy who approves everyone into being able to comment or being an admin. There are specific, with all the different modules, things that you can design depending on what you need, to then allow people automated, yes, you own the NFT, whatever it might be, and you can participate, you've done things, you've commented, contributed. So I think that's exciting for the automation, but also capture resistance, because it's based on actual reputation, Gitcoin passport reputation, whatever it might be, or whatever you measure as your reputation in your DAO community.
Absolutely, 100%.
Cool.
I think there's a great piece about emergent democracy. And just the quick point here that I think is relevant to what you're sharing is that there were some studies about tracking reputation and what forms were important, basically in this kind of like experiment open marketplace. You had it was a closed marketplace with reputation tracked. You had an open marketplace with negative reputation and positive reputation tracked, and then open marketplace with just positive reputation tracked. Open meaning that people can create new identities to become a seller in that marketplace again. And the long and short of it is that the only thing that was required in order to encourage good actors in the system over time was tracking positive reputation. So, and a lot of crypto right now doesn't have any sort of reputation. So you get people who do, come in and when token, and, devs do something, token go up when, like this kind of garbage level engagement. And, they can do that because there is no reputation system that is tracking who is a good contributor. So just to your point, I think once we develop the next level of positive reputation tracking, I think it's going to resolve a lot of
the quality of engagement, quality of what's happening. We'll hopefully improve a lot there. Next one I wanted to get into is toggle modules.
Okay.
This one is interesting.
Yeah.
So if you explain it, and then we can talk about some of the possibilities with toggle modules and what you can do with it.
Yeah. So eligibility looks at specific criteria for a specific account, right? So you have 10 accounts. Some meet the criteria, some don't, and then they can claim a hat if it's claimable, or at least they won't get their hat revoked. Toggle turns the whole hat on and off. So you might have a temporary role that you want to create an experiment with. You say, we're going to just have this for, this season. A lot of DAOs do seasons. I think that's a great model. They say, okay, we're going to just try this hat for the season. We know that the hat is going to turn off after the season. There's helps avoid capture in that sense. The other way that I think is interesting, that's very unexplored territory, is like turning a hat on under certain conditions. So you might have a team that's, 2 devs. They do a token early, and they say, okay, we're going to build a little progressive decentralization into our hat tree. We say, as soon as there are over 10,000 users, this new hat's going to turn on, which has a council, and we're going to have council members elected to that council that we'll work with and start to give power to in this process. And that kind of commitment to the community, I think, is really powerful. I think we can create kind of unruggable token launch structures using these types of tools. But it's still many more eligibility experiments right now than toggle experiments.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, the non-ruggable structures I haven't thought about. That's a really interesting one because you can build that in from day one almost. With the toggle that actually switches it on or off. The one for toggle modules that made me think is in a lot of DAOs you have an admin or you've got a security council. And there's a lot of power there and potential liability almost for those individuals. But what you can do is if you've got specific functions where you say if whatever feature or bounds you're tracking, if outside of this bound, then the hat activates and that admin can modify it, change it, whatever it might be.
Right.
That's actually a very powerful thing because that individual isn't sitting on an admin key, sort of, full, God mode access. They can do whatever. It's when there is a specific situation, they get access, they can do what they need to do, but then it's removed again when we get back to normal. So those are really interesting for me in terms of giving people the right power at the right time, but then removing it. So you're not sitting on power all the time.
100%. Nailed it.
Then the next one is Hatter modules. So
this is also a relatively unexplored design space. There's some things that, when you're doing smart contract development, especially on a non-upgradable contract, it's a lot more like waterfall than agile, right? You can't just like ship updates every week or every day. So we're working with a constrained V1 that is fully deployed. And some of the things that we now know from working really closely in the feedback loop with early wearers is that claiming, for example, should probably be in the protocol. And if we ever do a V2, then we probably build hat claiming, being able to determine if a hat is claimable or not when you set it up. We might build that directly into the protocol. But in the meantime, what we did was we kind of shipped this auxiliary contract which makes hats claimable. And that we usually, with the way that ends up is that we have the top hat that goes in the DAO. And then we have right under that, we have a hat for an autonomous admin or a configurator. And that hat is worn by a contract called a claims hatter or multi-claims hatter. And what that hat does is basically any hat in the tree that is basically registered with that claims contract, it serves as the admin that grants the hat to the people who are eligible. So basically, like, the claims contract looks for an eligibility module on the hat. Someone who meets that eligibility criteria pings the claims contract and say, "Hey, I would like this hat, please. I meet the criteria." And the claims contract says, "You meet the criteria, so here's the hat." And that transaction basically is our behind the scenes is the claims process. In the app, it's just one button. And I think it's pretty straightforward. But yeah, and so when we go back to this idea of dynamic hierarchies and kind of architecting kind of structures in real time, you can imagine a more advanced claims hatter or hatter that is kind of architecting those structures, maybe has AI plugged into it in a meaningful way.
I think where this becomes powerful and what we're seeing a lot now is sub-DAOs, where sub-DAOs are interacting with main DAO or just subcommittees doing specific things and they're responsible for that. But having these kinds of functions, you can build in that claimability, automate it, build everything out. So I think as DAOs evolve, this is going to be the type of tooling that gives you that authority to be able to actually implement this. It's not as much trust, etc. And that agent can automate it, which is really exciting.
100%.
Yeah, awesome. Anything else that is interesting? Anything else you guys are working on? That's what's exciting you at the moment.
Yeah. So a couple of things that I'm not sure when this will go live, but a couple of things that we're showing off here at ETH Denver, which are really exciting and kind of is a sneak peek to an upcoming launch. We have a mobile version of the Hats app, the Anchor app, is pretty much live. So we're getting some kind of early takes here, so that's exciting to share. And the main use case there is, when we sit down with governance facilitators, people who are like really organizing the DAO's process, they're using desktop because there's so much complexity. The visualization is really helpful, and being able to go into edit mode and actually like propose the changes of specific authorities, specific responsibilities, images, details, that you just really need a desktop experience for that. But if you're, an elected council member, or you're a community member and you just want to see your hat, you need to know like what authority you have, and you want links to all that stuff, so that when you're on your phone on the go, showing someone the DAO that you're a part of, you can kind of jump into all that stuff live. And now we really kind of delivering on that persona of the experience, the wearer persona is how we talk about it in our team. And I'm really excited that that's going to kind of create more of an interface and give governance facilitators and kind of like DAO, coordinators, more trust that their investment in putting together the investment of their time and putting together the Hats tree is gonna really be able to reach all of the DAO members. And you said something earlier about kind of like expressing bylaws and kind of think about like makers atlas structure in hats. And I think this is one of the things that unlocks. So you get this token in your wallet, you can see it, and you don't have to kind of like go through governance forums or like lots of documentation to understand, okay, what is it that I'm empowered to do and the DAO trusts me with. You can see it all in the hat. And I think we'll see how that kind of progresses over time.
No, I have to say that's when we were doing the hats, what's really cool is because you've got those descriptions. So when you open up the hat, you can see what authorities, how it works, what they can do. And that is almost taking bylaws and implementing them. To say, okay, we've written this document. It might be like acknowledged by the foundation, etc. But we need to now convert all of this. I mean, people design brilliant governance structures, but implementing those governance structures is hard sometimes. So Hats makes it on-chain, smart contract level, easy to do that.
Right.
But you also have a nice GUI visual way where human beings can just read it. That's where a Hats tree is actually, you can see it instead of reading, I don't know, an 8, 10, 100-page document. Now you look at, one page and you can click on each one. Okay, this guy can do this. And you understand the whole structure because, different people understand things differently. Some people want to read 100 pages. Other people just want to visually see it and they'll understand much quicker. And this is where I think we get into the adoption side. Because, our industry, crypto, it has been hard to adopt. Some of the interactions, etc., it's hard. And having something visual and easy to understand is going to help a lot. Because then people can easily just look at it. If it's on a mobile, even better. So yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you have this sense of like also being able to go through this spectrum of different modalities of enforcement, right? So if you're choosing, to put something on chain to enforce it, you're relying on code, you're relying on math to really be the differentiating factor of the protocol. If you're using like social trust, you're delegating something to someone and you just expect that they're going to kind of use it well. And then you have a subjective kind of group experience or arbitration process to remove it from them. Let's at least make that really clear. I think that's one powerful part. And just, moving from kind of implicit or even shadow power structures that exist in organizations into like really explicit, legible, clear arrangements that people can use to feel safe and feel confident in the efforts that they're putting into the DAO. I think that's really powerful stuff. I think that's going to change the way people think about their role in the DAO.
Awesome. Well, maybe then to start wrapping up a little bit, I always ask people, so in the DAO industry or even just generally, what are you excited about at the moment?
This is a great question. I would say, obviously so much of my excitement is on hats. So what I'm seeing in DAOs that are experimenting with hats is kind of just expressing more and more complex and kind of programmatic structures. So the experiments that are kind of like they were dreams in maybe the 2021, 2022 cycle, so that someone can sit down and for 30 minutes and express this kind of experiment idea on chain and deploy it. I think that that's going to be really powerful. I would say across the space, you're seeing more and more stuff that's happening with, basically like crypto intersection with AI. Coming from having done an AI startup, I think that that's always kind of been on the back of my mind, and I'm really excited about all those different interfaces. We talked about a couple. But really learning how to govern larger and larger amounts of resources, larger amounts of power, and kind of building our way up to, network states is obviously a big meme, and also like governing AI models. You start to see the stuff that like Botto is doing, where they're like really, okay, we're really running this as a decentralized governance of this model and creating art with that. I think that's a really interesting that experiment is playing out in a really interesting way. And we'll see a lot more people who are governing different aspects of models, data inputs, prompts, what's allowed, what's not allowed, content curation. If this AI produces some meaningful economic value, how is that shared amongst a group? Those are all like very interesting experiments that feel like they're really just getting started. And I'll say like, being kind of like in the weeds, it's not necessarily obvious because things move so fast in crypto, but we're just seeing the impact of blockchain scaling via L2s play out. We're in it every day. So like ARB and OP and ZK Sync and others don't really feel like that new. But if we zoom out to like the multi-year horizon, like we're just getting to the point where like we can do anything on chain and not have to worry about the costs. And that's just a really exciting kind of right time to be in space.
No, definitely agreed. Especially now as ETH prices are going up,
Indeed.
doing some transactions, it's getting pricey.
Feel it again.
Yeah, definitely feeling it again. I mean, it's always the double-edged sword. It's good to see the market do well, but your on-chain transactions feel a lot more expensive. Just to sort of take the opposite side of that, what are you afraid of, or what is sort of concerning you at the moment, generally, or in the industry?
It pains me to see this kind of narrative capture that happened in the last cycle about like what a DAO is. So there were a lot of people working on the early premise of DAOs, and it went in waves, right? But just being really up close and personal in the 2021, 2022 wave, people were like, okay, DAO, capture resistance, true decentralization. And then a lot of people made quote unquote DAOs where there were a couple people who launched a token and there was a Discord and that was it. And kind of like stealing that, the narrative form of DAOs, because DAOs for some wild reason became like the exciting hot thing. And then that kind of like created a lot of scorched earth when people got rugged. They thought they were in a DAO, but they weren't really. Rugged by a DAO is even like a funny phrase, right? So there's a little bit of I have some scar tissue built up around like, well, okay, is that, let's really scrutinize, is that a DAO? And like try to protect the term. I think the idea of DAOs is kind of still, people are coming back with that. Obviously, the people who have been building a space are like, we're doing a DAO. That conviction is pretty unwavering, which is, I'm lucky to be surrounded by people like that. But yeah, just that kind of the next concentric circles out that we're kind of educating people about, what does this really mean, and what protections do you have and not. And again, kind of like the theme of legibility. I'm really excited about that. And then I guess one curiosity I have is kind of like just the way that the L2 ecosystem and scaling ecosystem is going to play out. Like there's a lot of really great experiments and great ecosystems growing. But I just wonder like what the logical progression of that is. Is it a power law type of thing? Are there multiple different ecosystems that have different cultures? Do they eventually kind of diverge even more than they are now? Right. For us, Hats is omni-chain, right? We can be on any EVM. And we love that because we're creating this public utility, this core infrastructure. But yeah, I just, for someone who has to deploy on a single ecosystem and kind of like choose that ecosystem, I wonder, how, the interoperability between ecosystems will play out over time.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting one, and where you'll see them competing or working together, so that you have communities across ecosystems in the future or not. So I think that'll be very interesting. I mean, Nick, it's been a fascinating conversation. Really enjoyed it. If people want to learn more about you, more about Hats, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter and Farcaster, NintyNick.eth on Farcaster, 0xNN2 on Twitter. And then Hats Protocol is hatsprotocol.xyz. We're at Hats Protocol also on Farcaster and Twitter, posting regular like product releases and updates. join our community. You can claim the community hat. I think it's community.hatsprotocol.xyz. And also check out the app at app.hatsprotocol.xyz too.
Awesome. Well, I mean, really exciting, great chat. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Petri. It's been an absolute honor.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Decentralized podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would really appreciate it if you could like and share this. If you got any value from it or find anything interesting, please just also follow us on YouTube or wherever you're listening to your podcasts. If you want to connect with me, you can just follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. The links are down in the description. And I'd also like to thank our partner for this episode, Lemma. Lemma assists DAOs and foundation governance companies to do their governance, operations, and all the admin tasks. If you really want to focus on building your community and building the project that you're working on, Lemma can take care of all the admin, all the really boring stuff, so you can focus on the important stuff. You can find a link to their page down in the description as well. I'll see you on the next episode.